Hey everybody, it's me, Liana. Second week of the super duper instant gratification compromising technical quality YouTube video. And this week I'm coming to you from the guest room, so-called, in our house. It most of the year doesn't house people. It houses my stuffed monster collection. And E.T. is watching my back today. If that creeps you out, I don't care. It makes me feel better. That was a joke. Some people need it pointed out to them that I'm joking. And this is the reason I started up these videos, even though I don't like looking at myself on camera. I don't like having to see things, but I know, why are you in this business, Liana? Anyway, I'm digressing. I'm putting my thoughts into video because people aren't as good at understanding jokes and tongue-in-cheek comments in text. Weakness of the medium to an extent. Possibly some taking things too seriously on behalf of the third party on others. But I'm not here to judge. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, is the dicey subject of privilege. As in that check your privilege kind of thing. And this is the part where a lot of people go, oh god, no, freak out, no, don't want to talk about, no, la 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 la, can't hear you. Wow, it's really hard to plug your ears when you're wearing headphones. Anyway, privilege is this dicey subject that people freak out about. And I guess my original exposure to privilege was pretty good because I don't have the same knee-jerk freak-out reaction that other people do. And I think part of it is that people don't understand the concept of privilege. It seems a lot of the resistance to accepting the concept is that people don't like the specific word. And it's chosen deliberately because there are rights enshrined by, the various constitutions of various societies. If you're privileged enough to live in a society that enshrines rights, there you go. There's an example. But privilege within a society is different from a right because, for instance, you have a right to a fair trial. It is a privilege to own an Xbox. I know. I have to remind myself of that that it is a privilege to own an Xbox. Yeah, it is. And basically to me a privilege is what, religious people of faith would call a blessing. And it's not a bad thing. It's not something to be afraid of. Checking your privilege means you can be more grateful for the things you have in your life and allow you to act more consciously, and that's what the whole idea of checking your privilege is about. And when people tell you to check your privilege, it doesn't mean you give up your privilege. It's very hard to give up a privilege. It can be taken away from you, but it's very hard to give it up. No one's asking you to give it up. Checking your privilege means be aware. And I have an example from this past E3 that I think outlines the whole idea of checking your privilege that I had to do myself. So this is proof that I'm not asking you guys to do anything I don't have to do myself. And that's the whole point. Everyone in the Western world enjoys a certain amount of privilege just because we live in the West. Now the question is, how much privilege do you have compared to someone else? And that's somewhat subjective. That's somewhat dependent on, subculture and this and that. I mean, I'm privileged to be able to wear a Gogo Bordello shirt because it contains the word bordello. And in some places, that's not possible because of social pressure. But I digress. My E3 story. I'm coming out of my hotel, which was way the heck out in Universal City this year. And E3 runs shuttle buses to and from the hotels during limited hours during the trade show days of the show. And a woman was bundling her son, who was in a wheelchair, into a taxi cab. One of those van type ones that are large enough to hold wheelchairs. And I noticed they were wearing the E3 badges, so I said to them, why are you taking a cab? Why don't you take the shuttle? And she just looked at me like I was crazy and said, they can't fit a wheelchair on them. And of course I got indignant and righteous and suitably progressive and said, wow, that's BS. You should really complain. And she looked at me kind of strangely. And I took my able-bodied self over to the shuttle bus and got on. And while I'm sitting on the bus on my way to my free air-conditioned provided transportation to the trade show, I realized I was an asshole to that woman. She's got enough to worry about. It shouldn't be just her problem to complain about a lack of accessibility. Now, accessibility is supposed to be a right, but let's face it, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a nudge and a wink in places. And there's a perfect example of it right there. The building, the convention center itself, is wheelchair accessible. The shuttle buses and the individual booths are not. Now, I don't know if it's even possible, based on space and budgets, to make wheelchair accessible booths. There's only so much space. We have to squeeze so many people in to that convention center. People build these two-tiered booths. And the only way to get from the ground floor to the upper floor, which is where all the developers are, all the behind closed doors media sessions take place, is up a flight of stairs. Now, what happens if someone shows up in a wheelchair? Now, that's a different issue than the freaking shuttle buses, because a developer can come downstairs and talk to the person in the wheelchair. There's no extra costs incurred by the person in the chair or their families in that scenario. But getting to the convention center itself, I had to do it once because I decided to go to a party after hours for networking. The shuttles stop running at 7 o'clock, which is precisely when a lot of the parties start running. So it's either get on the metro and get horribly confused and possibly get on the wrong train, or you take a $35 to $40 cab back to Universal City. This poor woman and her family had to take a $40 cab each way every day just to go to the show. Now, that's wrong. And I had to check my privilege to recognize that this is not her problem. It's her problem directly. But since I checked my privilege, I recognize that this is everybody's problem. The idea of inclusion is a big issue in games. It's a big issue in the game industry. It's a big issue in the video game community. And the video game community and the video game industry, yes, there's a huge intersection point on that Venn diagram, but they're not the same thing. We can't turn a blind eye to somebody else's inclusion and accessibility issue and then expect to be accommodated ourselves. That's just bad logic, and the road to hell is paved with bricks of bad logic. So there's an example of how I had to check my privilege and realize, no, I have to get involved and I have to correct this, because it's probably more powerful coming from me, who is not directly affected, from this poor woman who might get dismissed as self-serving. And this isn't a question of, we're good people for including this woman and her poor son. No, it's not that. It's seeing people in wheelchairs as people and whole people. And we seem to have a problem with this as a culture, that we look for ways to chip the bits of humanity off a person because of things they can't control. And that's something we need to get better at for the good of us all, because that stifles innovation. That stifles fresh ideas. That stifles the next great achievement from someone who has to think differently because they're not the same. And that sounds like a silly truism, but sometimes truisms are true. Anyway, there's an example of privilege. I hope you guys can use this to think differently about the usage in your own lives. And please calm the heck down when someone tells you to check your privilege. It's good for you. It makes you happier. Trust me, I've done it. Okay, guys, see you next week. Bye.